beneath the stars above. For a moment, all the world was right. How could I have known that you'd ever say goodbye? And now I'm glad I didn't know the way it all would end, the way it all would go. Our lives are better left to chance. I could have missed the pain, but I had to miss the dance. Holding you, I held everything. For a moment, wasn't I the king? If I'd only known how the king would fall. Hey, who's to say? You know I might have changed it all. And now, glad I didn't know the way it all would end, the way it all would go. Our lives are better left to chance. I could have missed the pain, but I had to miss the dance. Yes, my life is better left to chance. I could have missed the pain, but I had to miss the dance.
Well, good morning to you all. This is February the 9th, 2021, and we're beginning chapter 4, emotional and social development in toddlers. I chose I'm not a real big country western fan, but I chose the Garth Brooks song this morning called The Dance. And it's a sad tale about a broken relationship. And one of the lines in here, the most important line, that's why I showed you the lyrics, is I could have missed the pain, but I'd had to miss the dance. And of course, this chapter is all about the dance, which in child development, we're referring to the dance between the child, the infant, the toddler, with their caregiver. Now, we need to put to rest right in the beginning. In the 50s, in the 1950s here in the United States, we in the child psychology or child psychiatry movement, um, came up with this idea, or at least Bruno Bettelheim is the person who is most remembered for this, that when children turned out to be autistic, which oddly enough, the word autism didn't even exist in the 50s, but for what we would know today, a child on the autism spectrum disorder, because it used to be just autism and now it's a spectrum of behaviors, basically ranging from always on a spectrum, mildly autistic to severely autistic. And we didn't have that term back in the 50s. But regardless, the behavior that's exhibited by children who are artistic uh, was attributed by Bruno Bettelheim and others. Now you have to understand Bettelheim was a German Jewish um, guy who lived through the Nazi death camps. And so after the war, he came to the United States and practiced his discipline. And he had noticed as a young person in the concentration camps that some people, well, it was horrible for everybody, obviously, but some people were able to survive and others were not. And he attributed that to the kind of upbringing that they must have had as a child that insulated them and stiffened them up. And a term that we use for that is resiliency, that people were made resilient by their child rearing. And that is true today. Nothing has changed that. But the big issue is Bettelheim, being a neo Freudian, he attributed this mental disorder to the lack of a relationship with the mother. And that is where you need to understand that this idea that mom controls the personality of the child is not sacrosanct. It's in many cases, in fact, I think you could say in most cases, the attachment process is between the mother and the child. But lest that we sound sexist or ageist, it's not the mother's biological position that absolutely creates the attachment process. It's a significant caregiver. And the book, as you recall, talks about even if maybe one of the parents is a good, attentive caregiver and the other one's not, that the child will turn out fine. And it's not just the parent, it could be grandparents. In this uh, predominantly Hispanic culture that we live here in El Paso, a lot of children are significantly impacted by a relationship with their grandmother or grandfather, or sometimes other relatives, uncles, aunts. And it's not so much the biological position, it's the relationship that a consistent caregiver provides for the child. So all that discussion in this chapter about daycare centers and daycare homes and all this stuff, it this particular author does not focus on the reality, which is it is a caregiver. It is a caregiver. It's not the mother. So, like I said, in many cases it is the mother. But uh, Bruno Bettelheim really did a lot of damage because we got lots of parents who, especially mothers, of course, who thought that the fact that their child was autistic, which again, they didn't even know the term, um, was a result of bad relationship from mom. So it was a bad mom responsibility. And of course, that's ludicrous. It's not to say bad moms can't cause significant emotional problems, which they can. That's the whole concept of, um, of somebody who has this connection that we call attachment. Um, Also, we don't talk too much about mental illness in this class, but 80, let's just say 85, 87% of schizophrenia is genetic. So let's say if it was 85, that means 15% of schizophrenics were not genetically predisposed to become schizophrenic. Plus, we know from twin studies that identical twins, if one of the twins has schizophrenia, the other one only has a 50% chance of sharing that same mental disorder. So what does that tell us? It goes back to our biopsychosocial. And even if you're predisposed because of a genetic predisposition to be vulnerable to schizophrenia, the answer is vulnerable. It does not mean you will absolutely become schizophrenic. So again, that gives credence to our known theory, not really a theory, it's an explanation, that biopsychosocial is what is responsible for personality development and for mental illness in general. And granted, certain mental illnesses like depression and schizophrenia seem to be have a significant genetic component. Some people escape it, some people don't. Some people get it and don't have the genetic predisposition. Now, behind me is, if any of you are art majors, I doubt it, but might know a little bit about art. This is a Matisse, famous Matisse painting called The Dance. And it has these women dancing hand to hand and just having a great time. And it's a very famous painting, so I decided to use that for our backdrop today. All right. When we talk about attachment, and we've talked about it before, and we'll probably address it again, it is that natural, inborn, innate drive to be connected to somebody. Now, Freud got it sort of right. He thought it was about nutrition, that children needed to breastfeed, and therefore mom was the provider of an id impulse, which is hunger, survival, and that naturally put mom and the child together. Well, that's true. That is a bonding, attachment creating kind of relationship. But again, it doesn't have to be mom. Um, back in the, if you can believe this, back in the slave days in the U.S., they used to have women pregnant, well, post pregnant, I should say, uh, slaves who were nursing, they would keep the mammary glands producing milk, and the slaves would be what is called wet nannies, and they would breastfeed the slave owner's wife's kids because it was too tedious for the slave owner's wife to do it. So give it off to the African American maid or nanny. But of course, you can't just turn milk glands on and off like a light switch. You have to have the natural hormones created while pregnancy is proceeding, and then once the milk is producing, you don't let it dry up. So you continue a process where the slave uh, themselves, their kid nurses until they're 4 or 5 years old or whatever it is. But in the meantime, they're also nursing their owner's kids, and so that would have been good for the kid. It reminds me of my oldest daughter, who uh, was I had to put off attending law school because of her birth, and my wife at the time was so needy that she couldn't imagine that she would have to be responsible for taking care of a child. And for the first 7 years of our child's life, she didn't have much to do with it, with her at all. And she did breastfeed, but she provided a breast, and that was it. I did everything else. Um, I'm not trying to sing my um, songs of praise to myself. I'm just telling you that there was no doubt in my mind that my child was bonded with me much more than her mother. Her mother never attended a doctor's appointment with her, a pediatric appointment, never went to school and sat in at those horrible PTA meetings and or parent teacher child conferences and all that. It was just something. She was saw herself as a high-powered professional attorney, and she just really wasn't interested in being a mother. And I was extremely interested in being a father, so it was a good dance. Well, at least on childcare, it wasn't much of a dance on anything else in that relationship, but that's another story. But anyway, there's a couple quotes, and I think there's even a question or two on a study guide about behavioralism and how behavioralists uh, think and give advice, inform others as to how they should deal with children who cry. And I don't know, the three of you, I don't know what kind of background you have about psychology, but I'll just give you a brief insight into this concept of behavioralism. Behavioralism says you do things that you tend to do behaviors that are rewarding to you. And what determines what a reward is a backward looking equation. When something happens and you like it and you do it again, then at that point we figure out that that stimulus was a reward, and the reason you're repeating that behavior is because you want that reward again. And then, of course, the negative side of that is punishment. So the behavioral say if your child cries, you just need to leave them, for the most part, the hell alone, because if you give them tender, loving care, TLC, attention when they cry, then you are reinforcing them crying, which on some level is true. But what is more true and more important is that children cannot communicate. The only way they can communicate with the outside world is by crying. So if you ignore the one method of communication that a child has, you're sending a message, clear message to the child. You can't trust the world. You can't trust me. You're really in a pretty rotten spot. You can't talk. You can't get up and walk. You can't move very much. And you're in a world of hurt. That's what behavioralism teaches children. So if I sound a little emotional about it, it's because I am. Behavioralism is a great technique, nothing more than a technique, to use in your bag of tricks, quiver of arrows, your armamentarium of things to do. And I completely agree with it. But you have to look at it in the true prospect. And fortunately, the neo Freudians in Europe um, figured it out and came up with a different idea. I'm going to show you a video that is posted in the video section for this class, but I want to show it because some of you probably don't even look at the videos. And this one is so profound, you just can't, words can't describe it. You really need to see it. So I'm going to see if I'm smart enough to be able to show this on the screen. If not, I'll do it on the let's see, do I have it here? No, of course not. Well, maybe. This is the Dr. Renee Spitz on child and mother separation. Okay, you guys need to help me out. Can you see that?
No, sir.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Damn. All right, I'll do it another way then. Zoom does not make it real easy to embed a video. Well, maybe I shouldn't give up so quickly. Um, portion of the screen. No, video. How about that? All right. This is too complicated. Of course, it doesn't help when computers are slow. Okay, what you have here are kids that are in a prison nursery. Um, Sometimes women would get, I gotta stop this. Sometimes women would go to prison and they were pregnant, and then when they had their kid, the prison authorities at least were nice enough to let them keep the child for a while. And unfortunately, this is more often the case, they came to prison not pregnant and became pregnant in prison. Imagine how that happened. And this particular wing of the prison was so popular that the nursery part could handle the kids, but the wing where they had the jail cells, the prison cells, they became filled up, and they were building another wing onto the original wing so that they would have more bed space for mothers, but they did have space for the kids. So what they did was they allowed and encouraged the mothers of other children whose were in the nursery to show some tender loving care towards somebody else's child. And unfortunately, of course, it was a good idea, but it wasn't very successful because the children needed more than just an occasional visit by somebody else's mom. They wanted their mom. And what was quickly noticed, as you can see from this uh, video, which does not have audio, is the result of kids who have been deprived from their parents or their mother, which in this case would have been their primary caregiver. So you can see that the kids are clean, the environment that they're in, the crib is clean, it's not messed up, their clothes are clean. Um, Although they are being fed adequate food, they don't look like they've been fed adequate food, and they're malnourished. They're emotionally vacuous in the sense that they lose their sense of emotion. They don't tend to pay any attention to adults. I mean, this is a 1950s film, and you can imagine the size of the camera that is on somebody's shoulders that is shooting this video. This is a big production, and there's probably a producer, some hospital or jail administrator. So this child is looking at that team of people, and although in this still shot the kid is actually looking in the right direction, I want you to pay attention to where these kids' eyes are focused. Right now, it looks pretty good, but you'll see in a minute other kids that are just oblivious to all this action that's going around their crib, which is just amazing. And then it'll have some typed language at the bottom here talking about how old the kid is and maybe how much they weigh. So you do not have to have had a kid of your own to realize when you start seeing these other kids that are really, really small, they look like they're either premature or maybe a week or two old, and you find out they're 6 months old. You can't believe it. I mean, like I said, I could talk about this all day and it would not have the impact that this video hopefully is going to have on you. So let's watch the child, watch their movements, and then pay attention to the written down part that comes a little later. For more than 5 months, they were separated. They deteriorate progressively. They become lethargic. What does lethargic mean? Slow moving, not very interactive. Their motility is retarded. What is motility? Motility is movement. Movement of your arms, your legs, your head. All that stuff gets progressively better when you are getting older and developing. They turn backwards and you start losing skills and abilities that you used to have when you've been separated from your significant caregiver. Their weight and growth is arrested, which means they just stop. They're very slow. You could use the word retarded for that. Weight and growth are retarded as well. That's a term that is not politically correct, but when you're talking about brain development and muscle development and coordination, retardation is a perfectly logical word. Their face becomes vacuous. Well, what does vacuous mean? It's like a vacuum. It's void of any kind of excitement, depression, whatever, fear, nothing. They're like automatrons. Their activity is restricted to atypical, which means not typical, bizarre finger movements. They are unable to sit, stand, walk, or talk, even though they're 6, 7, 8 months old, 9 months old. And schizophrenic kids will do this too with the fingers, where they look at their fingers and flick it. It's basically self-stimulation. This is what autistic kids do. This is what schizophrenic kids do. These kids are not autistic or schizophrenic. They are just really anacletically depressed, as Dr. Spitz came up with that term, anacletic depression. Nine months old this kid is. Wait till you see him. Look at that. Really? 9 months old? That kid looks less than a week old. This rocking is self-stimulating. There goes the finger stimulation. Kid's obviously crying. Kid is not looking at the camera crew. That kid is nowhere close to being normal size or weight of a 9-month-old child. They often have that stare where they just look out. It might be in your direction, but really they're not looking at you. They're looking beyond you. This kid is just not responding to its environment. And you can see Their physical needs are being taken care of. I can tell you their food was being taken care of too, but they just don't want to eat. Severely depressed because of not being with their mom. Ten months old. Again, for 10 months, this kid looks a little bit bigger than the other one, but not much. Playing with their hands, playing with their feet, not really paying attention to the camera crew or the people. Got the finger stimulation going on. Kids that are days old show more alertness and awareness of their personal surroundings than these two kids we just looked at. If you tried to play with this child, like with a mobile or some kind of toy or something, they wouldn't have anything to do with it. If you didn't know their situation, you would probably think they were severely mentally ill by the way their behavior is. Okay, let's move on to the next one. 37% of these cases observed the progression deterioration. The etiological factor, which means what is the basis, why did this happen? Underlying the grouping is the quality of the mother-child relationship. And the psychotoxic diseases, again, Dr. Spitz is a psychiatrist, it's quantity and emotional deficiency diseases. This classification offers viewpoints that were found useful in both therapy and preventive psychiatry. Okay, I think that's the main thrust of what I want to talk about. Okay, now the good news, that's the bad news. The good news is all of those children were able to catch up with their cohort after they were reunited with their mom and started eating and interacting with their primary caregiver. So this is something that was not long lasting. However, we know because of our understanding of neuroscience that there are some pretty dangerous things going on as far as brain development when you're in this kind of emotional state. And that can affect you your entire life. I mean, the whole concept of attachment affects you your whole life unless you do something about it. And now that is something that's malleable, that's changeable. But you have, number one, you have to recognize it. And then number two, you have to do the work to do something about it. So, okay. One of the other videos that's of great value to you is the Harry Harlow video about him and his rhesus monkeys. He chose rhesus monkeys because they have a longer um, period of nursing and mothering their babies more than other monkey groups. And so it kind of mimics as close as possible human relationships with moms and kids. And of course, they were of the belief because of more than likely Freudian understanding that of the real nature of the relationships was important. And so they tried to mimic a mother by putting a soft cloth covering over a wire mother. And then in the wire mother, they put the food. So they were trying to associate the difference between a wire mother who had food and the cloth mother who did not have food. They anticipated that the monkey would prefer the cloth mother because it's clinging, you can hold on to it, it's creature comfort, where the wire mother isn't really much of a mother at all, except it had food. And of course, some of them they fed on the cloth mothers, and some of them they fed on the wire mothers, and some of them didn't have cloth mothers to go to. And if you watch that video, you will see all the lessons learned from that kind of upbringing. Now, what's important to remember about that also is that when the experiment was over 2 or 3 years after they were doing what they were doing, they released these monkeys in to the general population of monkeys that they had in their lab because they didn't want to kill them and they were going to let them live out their life in the laboratory environment. What they learned and did not even think about or suspect was that once these monkeys were released into the general population with other rhesus monkeys, the other rhesus monkeys avoided the monkeys who had been raised on the wire mother. They were noticeably different. And the monkeys, of course, are a group of species that likes to hang together. So in the wild, there are, gangs and groups of monkeys. That's not that unusual. Lots of animals do that. Elephants do that and whatever. But when these monkeys were released into the general population, nobody befriended them. They basically ostracized them. And even other monkeys who were in the same situation, they didn't become friends. So it wasn't like an inside group. Well, it was an inside group and an outside group, but the outside group did not create a group. They were just individuals outside the inside group, which of course was a group. And of course, because of that, they didn't have any girlfriends or boyfriends rolling up here on Valentine's Day on Sunday. And they never participated in sex. They didn't get to enjoy that. And probably more importantly, on the evolutionary way of thinking, they did not procreate. So they did not create babies from these emotionally deprived parents. And that obviously has some evolutionary impact because when we talk about survival of the fittest, survival of the fittest for monkeys is the same for humans. You need to be in a group, you need to have some attachment to somebody. And I hate to put fear into your eyes or minds about kids that have been severely neglected. But um, some of these loner people who end up being serial killers have started out in life like this. First thing that pops to my mind is Ted Kaczynski, a brilliant mathematician who went to Harvard, got his PhD in math. They He was so impressive that Harvard hired him to teach there, and of course he quit, went out and bought or built this cabin out in the middle of nowhere, lived there like a hermit by himself, and then started putting together letter bombs and sending them to people and killing them. Um, that is something that happens. Uh, I know, I'm pretty sure we don't have any criminal justice majors, but those of you who are going in a medical career, you have to know something about criminality because you're going to see it in your patients. There's a book called The Biological Roots of Crime, written by Adrian Raine, who is a PhD, and he teaches in the criminal justice world, but he's also a psychologist. So he knows all of the psychological issues and the biological, neurological issues. And of course, he's very interested in the criminal population. So in a way, I guess you could call him a forensic psychologist. And he's well written. He's very interesting. And I'm going to read I know this might sound a little boring for you, but I'm going to read a little bit from his book because he participated in something that I have always thought should be done, and fortunately it was done. What these researchers did is the World Health Organization, WHO, came up with this. One of the few good ideas that I think they came up with was to take a look at really young kids, in this case 3-year-olds, and study them, give them a functional MRI, and then in a long-term longitudinal study, check on them periodically. So they went in, they examined, they picked 2 particular cities in the island of Mauritius, which is an excellent choice because most of the people who live in Mauritius are native born. They don't get a lot of people from the outside. Not a lot of people leave either. So they did have some sophisticated medical facilities where they were able to do MRIs. So anyway, they took a look at these kids and then they came back, 8, 10 years later, and then maybe 15 years later. And then Dr. Raine was a research postdoctorate fellow involved in this, his mentor. And so when his mentor retired, then Adrian took over as the lead researcher on this project. So now you're talking, 20 years later. And so what he did was, or at least what he talks about in this book, is he went and found the highest scoring male and female on this scale that he and others had thought that one of the reasons people exhibit criminal behavior is because their autonomic nervous system is really slow reactive. So what the body wants to do, because you've heard me speak of homeostasis, the body wants to do something to sort of raise the energy level raise the excitement level uh, so that they're not so slow. So their theory at the time was one of the reasons that people get into criminal activity is because they're bored and they want to always keep things shaken up. Kids that are in the third grade are being the class clown because they want stimulation, they want attention. So they act up, they get all the attention they want, even if it's negative, doesn't matter. Attention is attention. So for them, it's better to keep things moving and jumping around. So um, let me see, I'll just read a little bit of this. The WHO wanted to learn more about children who are at risk of development of clinical disorders later in life. It recommended that a study be conducted in a developing country, that the study would utilize 3-year-old children, and the biological methods should be used to identify children at risk for later mental health problems. Those biological reasons, of course, is a slow reacting autonomic nervous system, and of course, the brain anatomy of somebody who has got smaller brain volumes in areas that control emotions, like the limbic system. This was started in 1972. The study began like this. Families came to the research unit. Mothers sat down with their 3 years old and new toys were placed around them. Would the child leave the secure home base, remember, attachment? Would the child leave the secure home base of his or her mother and explore the toys? At one extreme, some children would not leave and sat clinging to their mothers. They were stimulation avoiders. Some would come and go with their mother, using her as a safety net, the old tag base, touch base, which is really a sign of secure attachment. Yet others would freely explore the toys and the new physical environment, the stimulation seekers or explorers. 8 years later, when they were aged 11, the children were rated by their parents using a checklist of child behavior problems that included aggression, like fights with other children, attacks others, threatening others. I found that high scoring stimulation seekers at age 3, the top 15% became stimulation seekers became aggressive. But to some extent, the early behavior of young children predicted later aggression. Maritas may be heaven to some of us, but like anywhere, devils roam. 2 children in our study illustrate the arousal, which is the sleeping, not sleeping, but less than active autonomic nervous system, arousal and temperament predict aggression. Further complexities must be recognized. Okay? So, Raj, they went there 20 years later. So, Raj was 23. He was the highest scoring male. Well, what was he doing? Well, he was a freaking psychopath. He'd been in jail. He was known for being really harsh, nasty to people. He had horrible relationships. He was classic psychopathic personality. How about the female? Female, whose name is Noelle, she was very active and grabbing excitement, just like Raj. But she took her energy and turned it into like a social butterfly kind of person, where she was very outgoing, very gregarious, and just happened to be very attractive. And she became Miss Mauritius for the Miss Universe contest, because Mauritius is an island country, right? And what she did as a living was, of course, she was a model and actress, but she also was a big crusader for social justice and bringing a better life to the citizens of Mauritius. So the slow reactive autonomic nervous system took a path different, one for this particular male and one for this particular female. So it doesn't on its face mean that a person's heading for jail if they show these kinds of anatomical and physiological traits when they're 3 years old. But it's, again, biopsychosocial. You have to wonder, they are genetically predisposed. They have an autonomic nervous system that was set by their genes. What can moms or dads or caregivers in general do to try to mediate the problems associated with that? Most of you probably know that what allows children who have emotional problems, serious or otherwise, including autism, what makes them survive is a parent or two that really could get into the dance and give that child what they need. Now, that's easier said than done. I just happen to think maybe I should post. I hope I'm not killing you with videos. I give you videos because we have such a limited amount of time that we meet in class. So I posted a long video today, and I mentioned it as a long video. You don't have to watch it. It's for those who are interested in how brain development from day one to about 2 years of age occurs. And it's a very excellent presentation by a neuropsychologist. And but if you're not interested in that, then you don't have to watch it. Now, I did give you a writing assignment, and the writing assignment is on attachment. I had a hell of a time getting the information posted because there was a problem with Blackboard and me allowing me to upload stuff over the weekend. So I finally got that resolved at 6:30 this morning when I called the Blackboard guy, and I know him and I know he gets up early. So we took care of the problem this morning. So you now have a questionnaire on the writing assignment section, the drop-down menu on the left-hand side of your Blackboard dashboard. And it explains, read the articles, watch the videos on attachment, take the questionnaire, answer it, figure out how it's graded, and then it will tell you which of the 4 attachment styles you are. Now, your assignment is to write a paper, at least a page, hopefully 2 pages. And if you want to write longer, that's fine. And I want you to talk about what you thought about the videos, like in this information I just told you. What do you think about child personality being predictable at age 3 just because of the way their autonomic nervous system reacts, and what their functional MRI, which is what parts of their brains are fired up during certain activities. That's a physiological process of the brain that can predict behavior. We're already talking about attachment predicting behavior as an adult, and you'll have a video or 2 on that as well. Pretty short videos, nothing really huge, time consuming. All right, I would be neglectful if I did not mention Konrad Lorenz. Konrad Lorenz is mentioned. He was a zoologist I think he was in Australia or something. Anyway, he's famous because he was working with geese, and he would take these goose eggs and put them in an incubator. And then, as you know, like chickens or all these birds, when they are ready to be born, they start cracking the shell so they can enter the world. And unlike humans and cats and dogs, they can actually see when they are out of their shell. And Lorenz figured out that there is a concept which he labeled as imprinting. And these geese, the first thing they see that's moving close to them is identified as mom. And once that happens, you, if you're the scientist, which Lorenz was, he became mom. And the geese treated him like he was their mom. So wherever he would go, they would go. You know how ducks walk behind mom? Geese do the same thing. So Lorenz became mom for this group of geese. He actually, sounds cruel, he actually got geese to bond with a bouncing ball. So the geese thought that bouncing ball was mom, and wherever they rolled that ball or took that ball, that's where the geese would go. So you could see, even at the primitive level of birds, that this idea of attachment, um, obviously with birds, or at least this particular family of birds, the attachment is immediate. With humans, of course, the attachment is over time. Now, uh, most of what I read, and I read a lot about this because I find it fascinating. I have my own attachment issues, so I have a high level of interest in attachment. By the way, here's the book that that questionnaire came out of. Um, it's a good book. And I posted a video by this lady who gives you an online, she's trying to, trust me, it's proprietary. She's trying to earn money doing this. So she puts this questionnaire online and you fill it out, and then she tells you, oh, you're anxious avoidant. Hey, I already knew that, lady. I don't need you to tell me that. But anyway, she does. And then, of course, then she wants you to pay for her educational program, $200, I think. Anyway, that's not important. What's important is you can take the test again. It's a different test than the one that's in this book. But it'll show you what kind of attachment style you are. So when you're writing your paper, you can talk about that, whether you think that's true, whether you think that those two tests or one test, if you just want to take the written one, fairly and accurately describes you. And then you take a look at your prior relationships. February 14th coming up. It's a reason to think about either your current relationship that you're in, if you are in one, or if you're not in one and you have been in one. Think about your relationship style and whether it relates back to your attachment style. So then we get into attachment milestones. I don't put 100% into what Belsky says here. I probably spent a little more time reading about this than she has, or she just chooses not to talk about it. Notice she doesn't say one thing about biopsychosocial. Now, you know more than her about that, or she just doesn't want to talk about it. I don't know what the situation is. She's not a dumb lady. She writes a good text. But when you don't keep up with the latest explanations, you're not doing students any favors. When you graduate as a nurse, or you graduated as a physician, or whatever your profession is going to be, social worker, psychologist, you want to have the best information, the latest information, and the best way to understand what's presenting themselves to you as a therapist, to you as a diagnostician, as a medical provider. You want the latest and greatest and the best. And if you're not talking biopsychosocial, then you're not with it. And I don't want to disparage any of my colleagues at El Paso Community College or UTEP or New Mexico State, but I'm telling you, if you're not talking about biopsychosocial, then you're yesterday's news and you aren't getting what you need because you want the latest and greatest, and that's what it is. All right. So mom is not necessarily the significant caregiver. Most times it is mom. Could be somebody else. It could be more than one person, but you got to have at least one person to bond to be attached to have secure attachment. I mentioned Bruno Bettelheim. The media, based on probably other psychologists and psychiatrists who do not believe what Bettelheim was putting down, he got labeled as labeling moms who were cold and detached from their children, causing autism, as refrigerator moms because they're like an icebox. Well, how cruel is that? Your kid's got autism, not because mom is a refrigerator mom, but because of genetic and or other biopsychosocial factors. And mom can help with that, or mom can be not helpful for that. But the one thing we know, mom did not cause the kid to be autistic. That is just ridiculous. And then it gets into talking about the attachment dance, which of course we have good old Matisse behind us, and we had Garth Brooks sing us a song about the dance. And you know, you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your parents. Well, in the Garth Brooks song, it's about a lost love relationship. So he's basically saying, I wrote the quote down. I could have missed the pain, but then I'd had to have missed the dance. So his theme of that song is, yeah, I got hurt when you left me, but it was a nice relationship while it was around, and I benefited from it, even though I'm hurt now because it's not, I don't have it. Another term people use, it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. And that, for me, that's absolutely true. And I have been hurt. I have lost relationships, mainly because of attachment issues that I hadn't had total success of working that issue out. But I'm getting better. Is attachment universal? Babies around the world get attached to a primary caregiver at roughly the same age. Percentages of infants categorized as secure in different countries are remarkably similar. Roughly 60 to 70% are listed as secure attachment. And if you see, well, I can't give you the page number because the digital, I finally got the physical book after complaining for the last 5 weeks. I got it. So where am I? Over here. That graphic right there shows attachment styles. Some of us don't even think that 60 or 70% of people are secure attachment. Again, we come from the broad-based medical community as psychologists or psychiatrists, social workers. We sort of see things differently than academicians who sit in a ivory tower somewhere. Some of us have actually worked with patients. I spent 6 years in a state mental hospital working with emotionally disturbed children and adolescents. So I have seen a lot of things. I worked with a severely autistic kid, and of course I saw autistic type behaviors in a lot of the kids that were schizophrenic. So it's pretty challenging. If any of you want, I have a video that I show in intro about a woman who was severely autistic as a child, always twiddling things and dancing around, doing things like you would swear their schizophrenics do. Taking feces and spreading it all over her room and I'm talking severe autistic. And she had a saint for a mother who was well educated. The father was well educated. And fortunately, he made a lot of money. So mom was able to basically bail out of her career and take care of her child 24/7, which is really what it required. And then she moved her around to special schools. And when she was in either late middle school or early high school, she found a special private school for her where they did a lot of training with animals and sophisticated professors who, like the one that she sort of bonded to, was a retired NASA scientist. And like many people who are retired, they don't like retirement too much because they're bored, so they want to do something. So they end up volunteering, or in this case, actually becoming an instructor in science. And this lady, they made a movie about. She's written a book about herself. She's written more than one book. Very fascinating lady, a graduate of my school, the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, middle of Illinois State School. She graduated with a PhD in animal studies. So she's famous for creating architectural designs for animal control places like a hog pen or a cow, livestock facility that holds livestock while they're getting ready to go to slaughter. And she's designed, at one time she had designed about 60% of all the slaughterhouses in the United States. So she's quite well known. She's a full professor at Colorado State University, just north of us. And she's very interesting because when you see her, you probably will say, it's kind of weird looking, like my family members call me, kind of weird looking, aren't you? And when she talks on these videos, if you're in the least bit sensitive, you can tell she's not like the rest of us. She's smart, really smart, very wealthy, and of course is enjoying teaching. And they made a movie about her. And maybe I'll post that. Again, you don't have to watch it. This is just something if you're interested in how somebody who was severely autistic can actually rise above it all. She goes around the whole world and is a high demand speaker on this issue because she's very motivating, because you can tell she did not have the best situation growing up, but she did have a mother who was very, very sensitive to her and very flexible. And because they had money. Now, one thing your author really slams in this book, and you have to figure out, you need to critically think. I'm not telling you this is the way you have to think. I'm telling you, in the most part, the way I think and what I think is important, but you always have to weigh things out for your own. In this book, the author is really concerned about socioeconomic status, SES. And she basically says, if you're in a poverty situation, your life is heading for the toilet as an adult. And some of that might be true. But since she doesn't want to talk about biopsychosocial, she doesn't realize that there are people like we had the pediatric neurosurgeon who ran for president in 2016, and a African American male grew up in public housing with only a mom, fatherless home, and he had siblings. His mother worked cleaning houses, and he grew up to be a world famous child neurosurgeon. And then he ran for president. He didn't win, but Trump appointed him as Secretary of Health and Human Services. So he's a fascinating man. Yes, he obviously had good genes for intelligence because he obviously is very intelligent. So whoever the dad was, and obviously mom had good working ethics and obviously good loving ethics, because she was able to make her kids feel loved, feel wanted, very well adjusted, and of course securely attached, even though they lived in the damn federal housing where violence and this guy would have to defend himself so that people wouldn't beat him up and take his lunch money from him. What a life that is. You walk outside your door and you have to worry about, as you walk to school, that somebody's going to beat you up because you're not in a gang or something. The author talks about when you look at critical periods and did you get enough food? Did you not get enough? Did you get enough emotional support? Did you not get enough emotional support? There are not only is it a issue of timing, as in critical period, but also how much. Did you get a little bit of tender loving care? Was that enough to make it happen? And when did you get it? A lot of things when you're younger, below 5, those years are really critical for a lot of things. I mean, when you think about attachment, the authorities in the know say, guess when it happens? Day 1, which this author doesn't seem to want to talk about. Day 1 until 24 months of age, 2 years of age. And so then your attachment style is set. Doesn't mean it can't change. And in the book, there's a story about a guy who seemed to be well attached and was doing well in elementary school, and then in middle school, his parents got divorced. I think his mom died, and then he was going to live with the dad, and the dad said, "Oh, hell no, go live with Auntie. I'm out of here." So started out with a good life, turned into crap quickly when he was in either in middle school or the beginning of early high school. And he had a bad life then, but eventually when he graduated and he got the luck of the stars and found a wonderful mate that got in the dance with the two of them hooking up, and he worked himself back into a secure attachment style and had a wonderful marriage and relationship. Now that reminds me, I'll tell you this one story here, and then we'll end it for today. There is another story I tell about is, and I think they mentioned, she mentions the orphanages in Europe, and I want to say it was in Yugoslavia, but I don't want to tell you wrong. There was a country where, um, because of war and all sorts of problems, they didn't have a lot of children being born and growing up to sort of take over the reins of the elders. So uh, Ceausescu, I think was his name, he, since it is a poor country, he gave people economic incentives. He gave them money to have children. And the more children they got, the more money they got. And the parents did it because they wanted the money. But then when they got more kids than they felt comfortable having, they got pissed and started complaining to the government. So the government said, oh, okay. We'll raise your kids for you. So they took the kids and gave them to the government, and the government put them into orphanages and tried to take care of them. Well, the orphanages were not run well; they were horrible, and people like from the United States who are looking for adoptive opportunities would come to the country and visit and check children out and see if they could make things happen. Well, this couple came there and they were thinking of a younger kid. They pretty much knew they weren't going to have a kid that was, a month old or less. So they were thinking of a younger kid, but they ended up adopting this kid who was about 12 because they thought he was so nice and engaging. So when they went to the orphanage, all the kids were like, prison population. They were all hanging their head. They were not involved. They weren't active. And this kid was active and talkative and had good manners and stuff. So they changed their mind. Instead of adopting a 4-year-old or 5-year-old, they adopted this 12-year-old. And the adoption went through. They came back to the United States. Things went pretty well for a couple of 3 years. And now he's 15. And even if he was a natural born child, 15 or so, kids are really trying to establish themselves as individuals apart from their parents. Usually starts even before that. And so he started asserting himself, and it got worse. And he finally left home because there was so much tension. He left, and he stayed away. I don't know, 3 or 4 years. Maybe he was around 20, 21 or something. And he was just living off the street, being a bum, taking advantage of other people. And somebody got a message to him that his parents were both in a car accident and severely injured, and they almost didn't live through it. And the message to him was, you may want to go visit them because they may not live to see you. So he did. There was enough of him that was attached to these adoptive parents that he went back, and he was moved by the fact that they were, of course, physically messed up because of a car accident, and it sort of drew a part of him to them that he had neglected. And he basically became attached to his parents again as an adult, a young adult. And he found the kind of safety and this and the environment for his personality to grow, his intelligence to be utilized. And he created, I think he's still doing it, he created a organization that helps bridge um, cultural differences and adjustments for European children that were adopted by American parents. And what we found out about this kid was the reason he looked better and was more active than the other kids was because the staff was giving him extra portions of food because he was like an authoritarian. He was like the prison, what do they call them? Anyway, the prison lackey who's actually a prisoner, but they report all their information and they try to control the prisoners. And so they're, even though they're a prisoner, the prisoners don't like them because they're in with the prison management. And so they usually have to be in protective custody or some private place. Otherwise, the prisoners will kill them. So they found out that's why he was healthier looking, because he got more food than the rest. And the reason the staff was willing to give him food, more food, was because he would keep the other kids under control management wise. And of course, he did that by physical intimidation. And so the staff didn't necessarily want to be interested in beating on kids to get them to comply, but they didn't have any problem giving him food and other incentives so that he would do it. And the result of that is, of course, he was brought to these parents' attention. So he had, like the Dr. Rain talking about the anatomy of violence, he had that personality, whether it was because of his, I don't know what his autonomic nervous system was, might be that it was a little slow reacting and he wanted the stimulus, and that's how he got involved in trying to control other kids. But the end result was he did get bonded with his adult adoptive parents, and was leading, last I heard, was leading a productive life. So this idea of attachment is a real thing, and it is subject to change. Even at my age, I am looking at a different type of relationship than I ever had before because of the change inside of me. So I am a personal testament to the fact that somebody can change their attachment style. Now, other things that happen neurologically, you're not going to be able to change that. But attachment is one of them. All right. Well, I'm going to leave the rest for Thursday. We'll start talking about the Head Start program, and I'll tell you that Head Start program is a great concept, but as applied, it's not always a great deal. Again, it depends on the people involved and what kind of training they have, what are their inspirational values. The book talks a lot about choosing a daycare home and a daycare facility. I didn't finish my thought about my own oldest child. We put her in a daycare home with an African-American woman. Our child was the only white kid in that group, but having been an investigator for the Department of Children and Family Services, I have dealt with a lot of abusive parents and abusive institutions like daycare centers and daycare homes, because I used to be an investigator. So I knew the points to look for in a good day. Well, I wanted a daycare home as opposed to a daycare center. And my daughter, of course, did wonderful with this woman. And I am thankful that we were able to have her in my child's life for the 3 years that I was completing my doctorate. And the results are great. My oldest daughter is a physician in Joplin, Missouri, practicing ENT surgeon. So it's all good. All right. Thank you for checking in. Some of you, not any of you four, but some of you who might be listening to this, looks like you have missed a test or two. You need to contact me and figure out what's going on with you that you didn't take the test when it was supposed to be taken and turned in. So I will work with you to get that done because I'd like to see you graduate from this class with a good grade, but you have to work with me. So several of you have sent me emails explaining to me why you missed exams and you're getting it worked out. So that's what I need to do. I need to hear from you. Otherwise, there's not much I can do for you. And eventually, of course, you'll fail the course if you don't start taking tests on time because they'll go down as zeros, and I'm sure you don't want that. So I'll work with you because I know it's a tough deal. Most of us did not want to be teaching online or taking a class online. So I don't mind doing it, but I know it's not as fun as doing face-to-face. And I know most of you, if you had a choice, you would not have chosen online. By the way, just a word of advice. The latest from administration is they are taking a poll from faculty as to whether they want to teach face-to-face in a hybrid situation or continue in a full-time online situation. So I think the school, well, we've got a new Surgeon General that President Biden appointed, and she's got enough brains to say, let the kids go to school. Come on now. Let's do it. So it's very likely that by the time fall comes around, you'll have face-to-face opportunities. I don't know about summer. We're actually doing face-to-face classes right now on a couple of specific disciplines that have labs like biology and chemistry, maybe even physics. Some of the nursing classes, of course, have clinical work, lab work in those. And so you need to be in the lab. You need to be working with patients, even if they're remote controlled mannequins in there that act like patients. You need to have that experience in order to be a good clinician. So hopefully, hold on, you medical folks, hold on and you'll get some face-to-face time because it's critical in your discipline. Anybody have any questions? I obviously posted the study guide over the weekend, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at it. I took questions out I didn't like, so I don't think you'll be confronted with anything that's controversial, but sometimes I miss things too. So feel free to ask a question. If you're too nervous to do it when you're online here with me, then just shoot me an email and I'll answer it privately. And of course, speaking of privately, if you want to have a private session with you and I, we can schedule that. We'll do a Zoom thing like this. It's just you and I, and you can talk whatever you want to talk about. So again, if you have questions about the writing assignment, let me know. It doesn't require you to do any research. Just read the stuff on attachment, watch the videos on attachment, take the questionnaire, and then talk about what you think about it all. And specifically, whether you think it's relevant to you and your style of interaction as an adult. And then again, Sunday is Valentine's Day. So be a hopeless romantic like some of us are. Enjoy. Thank you for showing up. We'll See you again on Thursday morning. Adios.